Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for joining me. Today I'm going to be doing a February recent reads video telling you about all of the books that I read last month. I read a ton of literary fiction, I read some poetry, a classic, some historical fiction and some YA. And we're ranging from 2-star books to 5-star books in this video, so make a cup of tea, get yourself comfy and let's get into it. So the first book that I read in February was Homey by Danez Smith. This is a new poetry collection by contemporary poet Danez Smith, and it explores themes of race, queerness, violence, and most predominantly friendship. I was so lucky and so excited to receive a proof of this earlier this year. Thank you so much. I love Danez Smith as a poet. I read their first collection, Don't Call Us Dead, a couple of years ago and I adored it. It is one of the best contemporary poetry collections I have ever read. So naturally I was very excited to get my hands on this new collection by them and I really enjoyed it. I love poetry collections that explore the theme of otherness in all of its various forms relevant to modern day, and this is something that Danez Smith does especially well. I love what is being explored in this poetry collection, and I love Danez Smith's bold, unapologetic and really inclusive outlook on these subjects. I really enjoyed the way that these poems played with sound and language and rhythm. I really enjoyed reading them out loud. I didn't ultimately love this collection quite as much as I loved Don't Call Us Dead. There were a couple of poems in Don't Call Us Dead that I really connected with personally, and I didn't have that so much with this collection. But it was still super strong, really beautiful, really affecting. Danez Smith is writing some of the best, most important contemporary poetry out there today, so please go and read some of their poetry if you haven't already. And in the end, I gave Homey 4 stars. The next book that I read in February was Things in Jars by Jenkins-Reid. This was another one that I kindly got sent by the publisher, and this was actually my first 5-star read of 2020. So pleased. This is a gothic feeling historical novel set in Victorian England, and it follows a female detective who investigates the mystery of a missing child who is very unusual. I adored this book. You know when you just have that proper good reading experience when you're so in the novel, you're so engrossed, all you want to do is keep reading. That is what I had with this book. Firstly, the writing is delicious. It was the first thing that hit me when I opened this book, and it continued to deliver. It is super descriptive and visceral and often onomatopoeic. It's lush. The tone of this book is great. It's very dark and gothic feeling, very atmospheric. All the characters are so great as well. I really loved the protagonist, Bridie. She is such a cool, kick-ass character. I also loved the young girl, Christabel. She is seemingly very strange and has some kind of supernatural powers, which is sick. And all of the side characters are so great too. We have a 7-foot-tall housemaid and a tattooed ghost, many different surgeons and anatomists. Such a cool cast. In terms of the plot in this book, I was obsessed. I love books that have a little bit of mystery and intrigue going on, and this book has so much of that. I was hooked. There are so many little intricacies to the plot as well. The focus of this novel actually switches around quite a lot as well. We focus on lots of different characters and different sub-storylines. This was such a satisfying and cleverly done way of piecing together everything that was happening in the plot. This book was just such a delight, such a great read. I can't recommend it more highly if you enjoy those kind of dark, mysterious, feminine-led, descriptive, almost gruesome Victorian novels. This is probably the best one that I have read. Of course, I gave Things in Jars 5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I picked up in February was We Used to Be Friends by Amy Spalding. This is a proof copy of a YA novel that I was really excited to read at the beginning of this year. It follows 2 girls who've been best friends for forever until the final year of high school. The storyline switches between the 2 girls' perspectives, one of the storylines moving forward in time and the other moving backwards in time. The thing that attracted me the most about this book was its unique narrative structuring. I was very interested to see how this was going to work, both in terms of seeing both of the girls' perspectives, but also viewing everything through these oppositely running timelines. I was really intrigued to see how that would help piece together everything that happened between these 2 girls and their friendship. But ultimately, I didn't really think that this structure added anything to the book at all. The timings and the ways in which the two storylines slotted together didn't add any kind of insight or suspense. It didn't really add anything to the reading experience for me other than making it slightly more confusing than a chronological narrative. Regarding the characters and their relationship, I expected that this was going to be a very raw and tender and insightful look into the breakdown of a friendship. This really excited me because I love the exploration of relationships in novels, especially friendships. I expected to see two young women growing and changing and possibly drifting apart, but all I saw was unnecessary, hateful bullshit. The friendship in here just frustrated me. It was full of miscommunication, and not in an interesting way, just in an annoying, why are you two not communicating like normal people way. There were moments when the two girls were just being bitches to one another, and that really infuriated me, because it left this impression that two young women can't just grow up and drift away from one another and that's fine. They actually had to attack each other's personalities. The writing also wasn't great. It was actually kind of poor at times. So I don't really get what this book was trying to achieve. Unfortunately, it definitely didn't do what I was hoping and thought it would. It was just kind of bad and boring. So in the end, I gave this one 2 stars. The next book that I read in February was The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt, and this was my second 5-star read of the year. This is a book that I have had on my shelves for many years. I've always had it there, always wanted to read it, always thought it would be good, but just never got round to it. And I finally picked it up, and I am so glad that I did, and I absolutely loved it. Shocker. Set in New York, this novel opens in an art gallery when 13-year-old Theo miraculously survives an incident that kills his mother. I found that sentence very hard to say. Honestly, there are so many other things that I could tell you that happen in this novel, but I went into it knowing only that, and I think that is the best way to do it. So before I went into this novel, I had heard it compared to A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara, which is a book I absolutely love. And even though this book is not like A Little Life in many ways at all, I do get why people are comparing the two. They both have this kind of epicness about them. They both follow characters over many years. They both have a focus on relationships. So I definitely got similar vibes. In terms of the plot, this book is pretty basic. You are just following the life of this man from when he is young to when he is significantly older. You're witnessing the different relationships he has and many different situations that he gets into. It explores themes of love and loss, privilege and addiction and friendship. The characters are the stars of this show. I can't necessarily say that I liked a lot of the characters. I think there was probably only one character that I liked, but I did definitely really enjoy reading about them all. They were so vivid and flawed and believable. The writing is also beautiful. It is very traditional but tends toward being very descriptive, which is something I love. There were a couple of quotes in here that I underlined. I thought they were so gorgeous. I just generally loved the reading experience of this one. I got so swept up into it. I loved the whole ride. I will definitely be reading more by Donna Tartt in the future. She is my kind of author. If you love epic character studies that are set over many years, then definitely pick this up. Or if you've just had it on your shelf for many years and you know you're going to enjoy it, then here I am to say, do it. It is worth your time. In the end, I gave The Goldfinch 5 stars. The next book that I read was The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins-Reid, and this was my third 5-star read of 2020. I'm going to stop counting now. This novel tells the story of the glamorous Hollywood star Evelyn Hugo, who is finally willing to share her story with the public, including her journey into fame and all of the stories of her 7 husbands. Monique, an unknown newspaper reporter in her 30s, is the person that Evelyn wants to tell her story to, although Monique doesn't know why. Right off the bat, this novel gave me massive Jessie Burton vibes. If you have read The Confession by Jessie Burton, then you'll know what I am talking about. So this novel is so up my street. I absolutely loved loved it. I love that we have a female protagonist getting to know an older woman and learning about her life and all of her relationships. I loved the structure of some of the sections being told in the present day and looking at the relationship between these two women, and some of the other sections being told in Evelyn's voice as she tells her own story. There are also newspaper articles and magazine articles dotted all the way through from various years, which is so cool. The characters in here were so great. I loved Evelyn and Monique and learning about their individual stories. Evelyn's story in particular was such a ride. I thought she was such a great character, so interesting and so well drawn. This book explores themes of sexual desire and parenthood and friendship, all things I love to read about. So clearly I had a lot of fun reading this one. It's very mesmerizing and exciting and just a good time. I think it deserves all of the hype that it's been getting over the past couple of years. So in the end, I gave this one 5 stars. The next book that I picked up was a classic, and that was Morris by E.M. Forster. This is a famous gay classic that is set in the early 1900s, and it follows a man named Morris who goes against many of society's expectations to be true to himself. I picked this one up because I love E.M. Forster. He is one of my favourite novelists of all time, and I want to work my way through all of his novels. And I really liked this book. I didn't love it as much as I loved Howard's End, which is one of my favourite novels ever, and I also didn't love it quite as much as I loved A Room with a View by him, because the storyline in that one is just generally more my vibe, but I did really enjoy this. E.M. Forster is just such a wonderful writer. I love his prose, I love his characters, I love his settings. Social commentary is always at the heart of his novels, in this one more explicitly than others, and that is something that I really enjoy and admire. If you're wanting to read some classic gay literature, then I cannot recommend this more highly, or if you're just wanting a classic that's a little bit different to what you might be used to, then this is great. In the end, I gave Morris 4 stars. The next book that I read in February was Milkman by Deborah Levy. I finally read Milkman, people. I did it. Cameron has been pestering me to read this book for about a year now, and now he can finally get off my back. Every man and his dog has read this novel by now, but if you still don't know what it's about, it is set in Ireland in the 1970s during the Troubles, and it follows a young woman named Middle Sister. So this was a great book. Nobody's shocked. I loved this book. So the storyline here is very simple. It just follows this woman who is in this community that is steeped with paranoia and violence, and it explores all of her relationships with the people that are close to her, as well as this man that they call Milkman. The brilliance of this novel is in its structuring and its prose. Written in very long, rambly, stream of consciousness paragraphs, this novel really feels as though you are inside the protagonist's head. The writing is also very colloquial, so it just makes the voice sound even more authentic. I didn't find the writing particularly dense or difficult to follow, if that is something that you're worried about. I just felt that it really allowed me a great insight into her mind. Everything just married up really well in this novel. The setting and the style, the character's voice and the time setting. I found it to be really sad but humorous and affecting. This is a very clever, very absorbing novel. It is pretty special. You can believe what everyone is saying about it. In the end, I gave Milkman 4.5 stars. The next book that I read was The Man Who Saw Everything by Deborah Levy. This is a literary fiction novel that has been on my shelf and on my radar for about a year now, ever since it made it onto the Booker Prize list last year. I have been meaning to pick this book up ever since then because I kindly got sent a copy, and then recently I heard my friend Rene talking about this book on his booktube channel, and he finally gave me the push I needed to pick this one up. So thank you, Rene. This book follows a young man in the year 1988 who is traveling to communist East Berlin to do research. As a gift to his translator's sister, who he will be staying with, he plans to take a photo of himself on Abbey Road, like on the Beatles cover. When he's there, he gets hit by a car, and the story goes on from there. If I'm honest, this is a book that I have found it quite hard to collect my thoughts on. It is quite a short book, but a lot happens. This novel is told in 2 parts. One of the parts is set in the 1980s, and the other part is set in 2016, and it's basically just an examination of this man Saul's life and his memories and his relationships. There is a very light, very hazy feeling to this book. It feels very unreliable. Political, social, and sexual lines are consistently blurred. I think this is a book that you need to experience for yourself. I don't think there is really any other way to understand it. I personally found it to be quite puzzling but alluring. It's very simple in a lot of ways, but also quite challenging and thought-provoking. I would highly recommend giving this book a go if it sounds interesting to you. I found it to be a very unique reading experience for me, and in the end I gave this one 4 stars. The penultimate book that I read in February was Golden Child by Claire Adam. This is another literary fiction novel that came out last year that I received a proof of. Set in Trinidad, this novel follows a man called Clyde, his wife Joy, and their 2 13-year-old sons who are very different from one another. One day, one of the boys goes walking in the bushes and he doesn't come home, and Clyde is faced with a very difficult decision. So I would say that I enjoyed this book, although not quite as much as I had hoped I would, which was a bit of a shame. This book started off super strongly and I had really high expectations for it. I really loved the writing and the setting. Everything was very vivid in my mind. I was really intrigued by the protagonist Clyde. His voice was very, very strong. I particularly loved getting to know the family and their different relationships and all the different dynamics that were going on, especially between the 2 brothers. Their relationship was super interesting. The narrative actually jumps around in time quite a lot, so you get to learn about this family at various points, and I really enjoyed this. It helped build up a very nice picture of the family. But as the book went on, I just kind of lost interest in it a little bit. It didn't have me engrossed in the same way as I had been at the beginning. The plot just weakened for me. It didn't have the impact on me ultimately that I hoped it would. So ultimately, I would just say that this was a good book. It had a lot of good things going for it, but it fell a little bit flat for me. So in the end, I gave Golden Child 3 stars. And the final book that I read in February was Girl by Edna O'Brien. This is quite a new book. I got sent a copy of it as soon as it came out, which was really, really nice, and it's one that I've been wanting to get to for a little while. Edna O'Brien is a super lauded author, and I am very happy to finally be reading some of her books. I ended up reading this one a couple of weeks ago and I really enjoyed it, and then it made onto this year's Women's Prize longlist, so that worked out very well for me. Set in northeast Nigeria, this novel tells the story of a young woman who is abducted by Boko Haram and she's taken away into the wilderness. This is a very powerful little novel. It is only around 200 pages long, but it had a big impact on me. There are many trigger warnings that come along with this novel, including physical, emotional, and sexual abuse, so please bear that in mind. But I thought this was great. It is very shocking and difficult to read, but it's exploring some really important topics. It's also clear whilst reading this novel that a lot of research was put into it to make it as factually accurate as possible. I loved Edna O'Brien's writing. It's very sparse and sharp. Her characterization and dialogue were on point. I felt very involved and empathetic towards these characters. Edna O'Brien is clearly a very talented author. I will definitely be reading more work by her in the future. In the end, I gave this one 4 stars and I would highly recommend it to anyone who's interested. So those were all the books that I read in February. I feel like I read quite a lot and some of them were so great, so I am very pleased. Thank you so much for listening to me chat about these books. I would love to know your thoughts on any of them down below in the comments if you've read them or want to read them. Also, please let me know what you've been reading recently. Tell me what your favorite book of February was, and I will hopefully see you all very soon with my next video. Bye guys.